You can't bullshit your way to become disciplined.
Today, we are very lucky to be here with Ankur Warikoo, India's top content creator and serial entrepreneur with a hugely successful exit at Nearby.
The pro is the amateur who showed up every day. Roger Federer was not born Roger Federer. He became Roger Federer from where he was as an amateur with all his weaknesses and all his misdoings. It's the belief that failure is a muscle, and like any other muscle, it needs development and it needs stress.
You've stated that it's actions, not thoughts, that decide your luck.
Not everyone is an entrepreneur.
Welcome back, everyone. This is the Loaf Podcast, where we break bread with the world's finest. Today, we're very lucky to be here with Ankur Warikoo, India's top content creator and a serial entrepreneur with a hugely successful exit at Nearby. Ankur, thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
So, given the introduction, the highly successful introduction, we're going to start right there with one of your key themes. Something that you say, which can be quite counterintuitive for a lot of people, is that your success is driven by your failures. So, what advice would you give to people for using failure as a stepping stone and as a lesson, as opposed to either being perfectionist or failing at the first hurdle?
I love that question to begin with. Thank you for that. I have often encountered, and especially when I was young, this was like almost this diktat that the stepping stone to success is failure. And I always assumed that way, that if you fail, bound to be successful at some point of time or not. And then I figured, I don't know when it was, but it dawned upon me that everyone in the world fails. Everyone in the world fails. But not everyone succeeds. So there's clearly something between success and failure that makes that failure turn into success. And I remember this book by Ray Dalio called Principles, fascinating book. And that's where it struck me that the most important ingredient in any failure is reflection. Until you don't stop and ponder and reflect upon why you failed in the first place and what got you there, what was the worldview, what were the mindsets, what were the belief systems that worked or didn't work, either way, that made that failure happen, you will keep failing every now and then, and you will wonder why it hasn't turned into any sort of success or not. And that's where things changed for me. And I firmly believe that one should fail as much as you can, because that's the best way for you to learn and reflect. It's very theoretical for you to just ponder upon something from your imagination, but never having felt or experienced it firsthand. And once you fail, and if you were to reflect upon it, you will only get richer in your experience and your understanding of what works for you and what doesn't. And that will ultimately, over time, lead you to success. I've seen that for myself, so I would believe that that works for everyone else as well.
I think that's definitely something that people miss, is just picking up the pieces, and from a logistical point of view or from a operational point of view, how to use the failure. I suppose the other part of it is kind of the more personal psychological aspect of being able to keep pushing through failure. Because for a lot of people, and for yourself as well in your story, it can be quite frequent before you get to that success. And it's not linear. It's not like, okay, I'm failing upwards in this direct way. It's you're failing, and then something might work. So what's the psychological mechanism, do you think, if you can make it so simple, that allows people to keep pushing from failure to failure before they reach success?
It's the belief that failure is a muscle. And like any other muscle, it needs development and it needs stress and tension for it to grow. And what that means would be, you can't wait for that one big failure to reflect upon and then change your life, because that's a very costly way of learning something. I often say, if you can, set yourself up for failure every single day. And that would mean picking up something which doesn't have a very high cost of failure, and you would almost with certainty know you're going to fail. Here's an example. Go to someone, complete stranger, let's say at the campus, and ask for, 50 pounds. It's quite likely that people will refuse. They will laugh at you. You don't know what's to come. They may just ignore you completely. They may verbally say something. They may physically say something. They may call someone. But whatever that rejection is, it will teach you something, and it will prepare you for how to build that muscle through that stress, through that tension. Smile at a stranger. We just don't. We're just so closed in our way of how we deal with the world nowadays, that we've forgotten that there is interaction that's possible between strangers as well. Go up to your professor, your manager, and ask for something that you know is quite likely to be refused, but the cost of that refusal is not very high. The more and more you put yourself into these situations, which are very low cost, but would train you like any other lifting exercise in the gymnasium would, you would strengthen that muscle failure. And when that big failure does arise, the only mechanism that's worked for me is I will allow, firstly, my emotions to be. I will not try and suppress them. I wouldn't try and ignore them or to reject them, whether I'm feeling sad or angry or disappointed or jealous or whatnot. I will let those emotions be. The biggest lesson that I've learned in life is that all emotions are temporary. Nothing that you're feeling will ever be permanent or will stay forever. Whatever you're feeling, whether high or low, is going to pass. And that means whatever you're feeling right now will also. And when that feeling goes away, don't try and conquer your situation by fixing everything. That's almost impossible to happen in a short period of time. So whether you failed at an interview or you failed at a startup or you failed in a relationship or whatnot, don't try and fix that entire piece in one go. It will take time. Instead, pick something which is very small, but is a step to get you out of where you are. However small that step is. It could be as simple as going back to your resume and changing something if you've been rejected in an interview, or if you've been rejected in a relationship, if you've gone through a bad breakup or whatnot that you call failure, going back to someone who is a close friend and just asking for, hey, why do you think I would still make a good friend? Just for that validation, just for you to get out of that mindset that you're in. And every day that you do that, every single day that you do that, you will eventually have time, heal yourself, and get you out of it. And when you do, you're in the perfect mindset to reflect upon what just happened. So these three phases: let your emotions pass. Number two, take the smallest possible step to get you out of where you are. And once you're out of it, then just reflect upon what just happened. And if you were to just bring these things together, you would have, in my opinion, any mechanism to get you out of any failure, however big or small. It's just the time period of each phase that changes, but not the composition of these three.
I can relate. I just got a new job, as I told you before the interview, and it took me about 50 applications till I finally got a yes. So on that front, I can relate. But maybe for the general public, it's easier for them to imagine someone like me as a 20-year-old. It's easier for them to imagine me failing. But for someone like you, who's obviously hyper successful, maybe it's harder to visualize you failing. So I suppose my question will be to help illustrate the situation. When was the last time that you failed?
Yeah. It's a very interesting question because it's always hard for me to answer this. I often get asked this question: when was the last time you failed, or what was the biggest failure you've had in your life? And suddenly when that question is posed in that way, the word failure seems much bigger than what it is, because in my head, failure is very different from a loss. It's almost like if you're playing a sport, any sport, competitive sport, and if you were to lose that match, it's not a failure. You didn't fail the sport, you just lost that match. Failing is when you would just say, you know what, I can't go on anymore. I give up. I want to stop trying. I want to stop moving forward. And by that definition, I'd like to believe I've never failed. I've lost far more times than I can count, but I don't think I've ever failed, because whatever hit me, as hard as it was, I managed to get out of that. But if I were to use the loose definition of failing, or at least things not going my way as I had wished for or planned for, it was as recent as 2020 when COVID happened, and everyone went through their own experience of what the pandemic did for them. And for me, it was a very interesting phase, certainly not expected or desired, where I just stepped down as the CEO of my last startup, which was nearby. And that happened at the end of 2019. I had been at that startup and in that industry for nearly a decade. I'd spent some wonderful times, learned a lot. And I thought that it was time for me to move on, to do the next thing. I was turning 40 in 2020. So I felt that that would also be a nice moment to have a decade to look forward to doing something different. And as luck would have it, in 3 months of my so-called break of discovery, March 2020 happened, and the entire world went into a lockdown with no clue of what to expect and how things would be. We all thought it would be a matter of weeks, and then it turned into months and then years. During that period, I had no income because I wasn't working anywhere. All of my capital wealth had been invested in my startup and other startups. So I had nothing on paper in terms of actual cash. And I had a family to support. I have responsibilities and all of that. And in that moment, it just felt like, how could a 40-year-old find himself in this spot? Like, how could somebody who's gone through all the right checks and balances of a good pedigree, great experience, working with smart minds, being thoughtful, being deliberate, just find themselves in this complete mess where they have no income coming in, they have no bank balance to support their family, they're staring at bankruptcy, and now they have to start their life all over again with the responsibilities that come with a family and everything. And that certainly felt like this was not how I had planned, and this certainly wasn't how it should have been. And I remember in that moment, the thing that liberates you the most is getting rid of every social construct that either you have imposed on yourself or the society has imposed on you. What I mean by that is, we all have this identity that often gets built without our choice of who we are. Here you are this top grader. Here you are this great worker. Here you're this good-looking person. Here you're this best friend. Here you're this fantastic trader. Here you're this wonderful sportsperson, whatnot. And we begin to believe that, to imagine that, and to become that, very rarely establishing who are we truly inside, outside of our designation, outside of our status, outside of even our name. What's our core identity? And once you believe that that core identity is what matters to you, it's immensely liberating. And I figured about 4 years back that my core identity was that I want to be as good a father as I can be to my kids, as good a partner as I want to be and I can be for my partner. And I just want to teach. I want to teach as much as I can. And I've always been a teacher, and I've loved teaching, and I love breaking down complex things into something that's simple and consumable. And if I can get to play these 3 roles for the rest of my life, I couldn't care less how much money I have, what people think of me, where I stay, what car I drive, how much money I have, and everything will just still make sense. And once you have that clarity, I certainly did, it just made it so easy, because now you were not competing to fight the next status game. You were not competing to win the next million in your bank balance or anything like that. You were just playing a very different game for everyone else. Very different game. And I played that game. And as luck would have it, I stand here with a very different outcome that people find it easy to quantify. Oh my God, he's earning this much, and he has this much, and he has these many followers, and blah, blah, blah. But again, as I said, I couldn't care less. All of this could vanish tomorrow, and I would still be the same person that I am, very content with where I am, because I get to play the 3 roles that I care about the most.
Thank you. We're going to move on, I think, to the authenticity part and finding yourself just in a second. But if we can just stick on the success part for a second, restarting at 40, no cash, must be difficult, especially for somebody like me. You kind of have a burning desire to get out into the world, make your mark and everything. You might have felt like, okay, I've started this company now. I've invested here and here. I've made these achievements, and yet I have to restart. And I think that's why in your book, for example, Do Epic Shit, and in many other places across all your content creation, 2 big things for you are motivation and discipline. But these are words that get thrown around a lot on the internet, and they can often mean quite different things to different people. So how do you differentiate between motivation and discipline? And what strategies do you think that people should use so that they can harness them effectively?
That's a great question. I go back to what Mel Robbins once said, and I love her for what she said. Motivation is garbage. And I totally believe that. Motivation, in my opinion, is garbage, because it's the worst friend one can have. If you really think about it, for doing all the shitty things in life, you would never need motivation. Like never has there ever been anybody who said, I wish I had the motivation to sleep for an hour more. I wish I had the motivation to drink more, to eat more. I wish I had the motivation to not go to the gym. I wish I had the motivation to just laze around and doom scroll my Instagram feed. Nobody ever said that. But somehow we need motivation to show up at the gym. We need motivation to work. We need motivation to eat right. We need motivation to call our parents or to be good friends to our friends and be the able partners for our partners. And if that thing were a real person who would always be there when we are getting sloshed, wasting our time, completely getting wasted, but would never be around when we have to do the meaningful things in life, we would hate that friend. That would be a really toxic friendship to have. But we love motivation and we feel that that's the best friend we can have. And I do believe that a lot of people have a toxic relationship with motivation because they haven't yet figured it's the one reason why they haven't moved ahead. So for me, everything is discipline. And what I mean by discipline is you do what works for you every single day. What works for you is extremely important because what works for me may be different from what works for you, will be different from somebody else's what works for them. And finding what works for you in the manner that it works for you and doing that every day is how life ultimately unfolds itself. I have a favorite quote from my book, Do Epic Shit, that says, the pro is the amateur who showed up every day. And I love that because that is how things are. Roger Federer was not born Roger Federer. He became Roger Federer from where he was as an amateur with all his weaknesses and all his misdoings. And he just showed up every day, every single day. And that's same for every successful individual that you would want to name. So for me, discipline, consistency. Now, where does that come from? The only way that you can ensure that you're consistent in life, that you're disciplined in life, is that you're doing something that's authentically you, which goes back to it works for you. You can't bullshit your way to become disciplined. You can't pretend or fake your way to become disciplined. You can fake it till you make it, but you can never fake it to be disciplined. And that for me is a key distinction. Because I hear so many times people writing into me saying, hey, Ankur, I had this fantastic routine. I was doing really well. I was showing up and I was going to the gym and I was reading and I was meditating and all of those nice things. And I was going for 3 months or 4 months. I was like absolutely killing it. And then the cousin's wedding happened. That's it. 5 days, my routine's gone for a toss. I can't get back to it. And I'm like, bro, if you can't get back to your routine, it was not a routine. It was just something that you had designed for yourself to believe that it was a routine that works for you. Because when was the last time something worked for you and you didn't want to do it or you struggled to get back to it? If it works for you, you will automatically do it. You were just forcing yourself to do it. And that is the clincher. Because just like a spring, even if you were to stretch it, it'll come back to its original shape because it was working for you.
Yeah, I wanted to maybe clarify something there, which perhaps our audience might be confused about, because you say that you shouldn't force yourself into it, but at the same time, how does someone who is so averse to changing their habits, or someone who's so stuck in their ways, how do they become disciplined without forcing themselves?
The way to do that is recognizing the difference between what is physically challenging and what is intellectually challenging. Almost every new thing that you do will be physically challenging, and we should never run away from physical challenge, because when I say physical, I also include mental challenge in there. So it's physical, mental, it's the whole being. You will, when you go to the gym for the first time, have sore muscles. You will feel the next day as you don't want to wake up. But is it intellectually challenging you? Is it getting your mind in a space or in a direction that you haven't seen before in a good way? Every new lesson that we learn will be hard by definition in the beginning because it's a new thing. So every individual that has succeeded has gone through that chasm of looking like a fool because he or she didn't know what it was until they figured what it was. But that was never intellectually easy for them. It was always challenging, and that's what got them there. So the big difference is people confusing their comfort in the real world versus their comfort here. Comfort in the real world is what most people gravitate towards. But that's entertainment. So when you're slouching on your couch and you're doom scrolling, that's wonderful. Who wouldn't want that life for the rest of their life? But it wouldn't get there anyway. It wouldn't do anything to your life. But if you were to intellectually challenge yourself, then you would just move ahead. Even if you were to sit on the same table, even if you were to sit physically at the same space and so-called be comfortable, but you're learning something online, you're writing something, you're reading something, you're intellectually moving yourself forward. That is you in a good way forcing yourself. So force yourself intellectually because the physical force may or may not even be necessary.
Yeah, I think it's a really good way of putting it. And I think habits are a really good way of achieving success. These one-off spurts of motivation ultimately are, they're like maybe small explosions, whereas you need to keep the fire burning. I see maybe a small candle that stays lit is more effective than one big burst of flame, which then dies out. Sure. But in any case, to move it on to habits and your habits specifically, you've stated that it's actions, not thoughts, that decide your luck. How do you personally take action in your life, and how do you think others can adopt a similar mindset to create their own opportunities?
So nearly 20 years back, something fascinating that I hadn't planned for happened in my life that set my life in, I'd like to believe, on a completely different course. I was in the US doing my PhD in the field that I wanted to, which was physics, and doing commendably well there. I was top of my class. I was on 100% scholarship. I was in a great university. I was having a time of my life. This is the life that I had chosen for myself, designed for myself. And yet there was something that wasn't working out for me. I realized that I wasn't happy. I was good at what I was doing, but it didn't make me happy. So at the age of 24, I decided to drop out of my PhD and then come back to India. And when that happened, something shifted, because all my life I'd been taught and trained that to win in life, you got to have goals, you got to have targets, and you work towards them. You have to have a plan. And I had a plan for my life. I had a really solid plan for my life, and it was a plan that I was doing well upon. And yet I crushed the plan with my own hands. So when people told me, hey, it's okay. If plan A didn't work, plan B. Plan B didn't work, plan C. But you got to have a plan. Got to have a plan. I was like, on what basis do I come up with another plan? I just destroyed the best plan that I had with my own hands. I have no foundation to come up with another plan. So I was forced to ask a very different question at that point of time, which again, as I said, I didn't choose to, but I was forced to. And that was, is it possible to live life without a goal or a target or a plan? And if yes, how would that life look like? And I set about trying to find the answer to that question. And I think I found that answer to that question, which is why for the 20 years that I've lived ever since, I haven't had any goal or any plan or any target for my life. None whatsoever. So if you ask me 5 years back, where do you see yourself 5 years from now? I wouldn't have an answer. If you ask me today, where do you see yourself 5 years from now? I wouldn't know. I wouldn't even know where I would be a year from now. And I couldn't care less. It doesn't matter to me. What matters is, what do I do every day? And that goes back to what you were referring. My habits have set me up. I don't set goals or targets, I set habits. And those habits have compounded in a way that I could not have designed for myself in any way. What are those habits? I read every day. And I make it a point to read as much as I can. I love books. I meditate every day. It's been a complete constant for the last 8 to 9 years now. I write every day, and I've been writing for the last 20, 25 years now, almost every day. I'm a very everyday person. And by that definition, I'm a very boring person, if you may say so, because I don't get bored. I don't seek variety. I'm absolutely okay wearing the same clothes every day, eating the same clothes every day, doing the same things every day. And I can imagine why that would work for me, but not for everyone else. But as I said, find what works for you. What works for me is repetition. So I would just repeat. It's just like the gym. Just go and rep. And that will just compound to a muscle, whatever you want to build. I love that about my life, because I know for a fact that reading, writing, meditating, playing tennis, working out, eating right, spending time with people, meeting a new person every week, checking my emails, all of my emails. I read 100% of my emails. I come from a generation where emails were a thing, and I can totally recognize where you would be like, who reads all emails? I do. And I cannot begin to tell you how many opportunities in life I've got simply because I read all my emails. Just that. Not because there was somebody seeking me out, but because something just struck me in a moment of time that I could not have planned or imagined or designed. And it just made sense in that moment for me to move forward in some way. And the next thing led to another and to another and to another. Long story short, I think repetition has worked incredibly well for me. And that's why I love repeating. And my calendar is a reflection of that. It just has these blocks, repetitive. So whenever I pick up a new thing in life, my core approach towards that new thing is, what is it that I can do in this or for this that is repeatable, that I can do every day, every week, every month, every quarter, whatever that cadence is, and just be at it for a really long time, as long as it's enjoyable and working for me. I don't care about the end result. And what's happened is, more often than not, the end result has been far, far bigger than I could have set out as any goal or target when I started.
I agree. I think people are very much too goal focused, and that's something you see a lot in the UK educational system. I'm not sure how it is in India, but you have, of course, exams, 16, 18, then a university, you have finals throughout the last couple of years. And what you have is people cram, they start to work loads. And then as soon as the exams are over, it all either comes out their head and they stop working, or they just end up completely relaxing. But this being said, of course, goal setting does have to have some place. And so I want to ask you about how that interaction works. So let's say, for example, you want to build a new startup or something. Of course, you have to set goals for how you're going to do that, and etc. And the habits will be put in place for that. So how can we stop our habits from being, let's say, thrown out the window when a certain goal doesn't quite work or anything, and keep consistent despite the fact that we do have to set these goals, which may fail and which may set us off kilter?
So this is something that I learned from Amazon, the company. And if you speak to any senior executive at Amazon, for that matter, even the ones below the most senior level, they always talk about these things called input variables. And I love that. What it says is, control the controllables. If you were, and I'm reminded of this fascinating conversation, Jeff Bezos, at the time when he was the CEO of Amazon, it was, I think, the quarterly results or something, and there was some financial reporter who asked him, hey, what do you think the next quarter is going to look like? and he's like, the next quarter was decided 6 quarters back. Like, I know what the sixth quarter from now on will look like, because you control the controllables. You know precisely how many new items have you added to the merchandise, what's the kind of visit flow that you're going to get from users, what's the kind of click-through that you're going to achieve, what's the kind of pricing that you want to have, what's the kind of discounting that you're going to give, what's the kind of contacts per transaction or users that you're going to generate. And all of that is going to result in an outcome that all of you are fascinated by. But nobody is controlling that outcome, including me. There's nobody in the system that's responsible for revenue. Everybody's responsible for the input that makes that revenue happen at some point of time through this interaction. It's a really hard space to be in. And as a startup founder, I remember the first half of my startup experience was just coming to terms with how this thing can even work. Because You're right. We're just so tuned and even taught through our education, through our training, through even our parenting, of always focusing on outcome and the output. This is where you want to be. This is where you want to achieve. That we forget what makes those interactions possible. And once I started to think about it actively, get to a point where I reflected, more importantly, made that cultural shift in the startups that I was running, we were able to, I wouldn't say nearly as close to what an Amazon has been able to, but we were able to get to a point where suddenly the conversations turned from what's the goal that we want to achieve from an output perspective to the goal you want to achieve from an input perspective. And that goal, if you think about it deeply, is not a goal. So a good example of that is, say, writing a book. The two of you could say, hey, my goal is to write a book this year. And you know what? You may be, or you may not be. That's something that you will get to know at the end of the year. But instead, if you set a goal, which is not really a goal, but it's more of a habit, but let's call it a goal. I'm going to write every day. I'm just going to write every day. I guarantee you that you will have a book. It may not happen in a year. It may even happen in 6 months. It may take a year and a half, but there is no way that a book is not coming out because you're writing every day. So it's the same thing. 1st Jan, people are like, oh, I want to lose 10 kgs. I want to lose 20 kgs. Sure, you may not. But if you decide to show up every single day at the gym, you are going to get fit. There is no escaping that, ever. And that, I think, is the difference between the input and the output. So even for a collective, while I do agree that outcome-based approach makes it really easy for people to align themselves well, and maybe for really large organizations, you have to have that. I've never had the experience of running large organizations, so I can't comment. But for a small one, I do believe that an input-based organization or culture can be beautiful. And I run that at my startup currently, and we've seen the success of it. And I wouldn't change until I'm forced to, or something comes along that changes my experience till date.
Something that you mentioned is these habits, and we've talked about it for the last 10, 15 minutes now, but I'm curious if you think there are some people who are maybe more cut out for it than others. So, for example, entrepreneurship in general is, in my understanding, something which, in its nature, it can only work for a few people. Do you think that there are some people who might just not be able to be entrepreneurs, even if they put in the work? Or do you think that it's something that anyone can achieve?
No, I genuinely do believe, and it's an unpopular opinion to state so, that not everyone is an entrepreneur. And the reason is not because entrepreneurs are a different breed altogether and you can't become one, or people are born one and you can't train yourself to become one. I just believe that it's a matter of choice, which comes from a combination of so many things that could be outside of your control. The environment that you grew up in, the experiences that you had as a kid, the kind of encouragement that you got or did not get, so on. Entrepreneurship requires you to bear a prolonged period of uncertainty for a ridiculously low probability of success. I often say this. There's a far higher likelihood for you to become wealthy and to have a life of financial security and also professional recognition while working in a job than starting up. The odds are absolutely stacked up against starting up. We only look at the survivors. Like we love reading the news of, oh, let's look at Uber and let's look at Facebook and let's look at Airbnb and let's look at all that. Well, let's look at the millions that try to do the same thing that we would never hear about. Classic survivorship bias. So when you go through the actual success rate, which documented by research says that there's a 10% survival rate. And then there is a success rate, which is after surviving, do you have a follow-on funding round or do you get to profitability? And then there is a success metric, which is, do you actually end up making money? Do you do an IPO? Do you do an M&A or something that has a financial outcome attached to it? You're down to 1%. And if I were to tell both of you smart minds, hey, you have a 1% chance of becoming wealthy. Do you want to play that casino game? You'll be like, I'm out of here. I don't want to. Do I look dumb? No. Because if you were to go down that classic professional path, you have your ladders very well designed. You know exactly when you're going to hit the next level and the next level. You may not enjoy it. You may enjoy it. It may be up your alley. It may not be. All of those are still within your control, but there is decisiveness in how you get to the next level. And you do that, you'll get there. 20 years, 25 years, you can become the CEO of any company that you choose to. Well, then, why do a startup? And I don't have an answer to that, which is why I say it's not for everyone. Because if I had, then I'd say, oh, it's for these people, and the others can just train themselves to think like those people or whatnot, or mindset rather, not just people. But I do believe that there is some DNA which comes through a combination of multiple things that I possibly can't get into, which make this irrational optimism become a part of their life. What I do, and this is just a side remark, I do see that in today's world, starting up is really cool, really sexy, really fashionable. And I often find particularly young folks picking up entrepreneurship for the wrong reasons. They're picking it up because they want to get wealthy. Terrible reason. As I said, you're far likelier to make money as a professional than as a startup founder. They pick up entrepreneurship because they hate their current life. They hate their current job. They hate their current boss. They hate their current whatever it is. So it's just an escape mechanism, which is almost always the wrong reason to start anything, not just entrepreneurship. And the third one, which is often the larger case nowadays, they want to become an entrepreneur because everyone else is becoming one. So it's just driven by FOMO. It's just driven by the Shark Tanks of the world and the glamour around startups and so on. Very rarely recognizing that that's almost always a poor reason to do anything. But if you were to just pick it up because you have no reason why you are, then it may be that you are of that breed.
I'm glad you said that at the end, because that was kind of going to be the thing I added in, which is that I'm happy that you're giving kind of a realistic picture about the uncertainty, etc. Because I think with characters like Alex Hormozy and those kind of people on the internet, there's a big glorification of the idea, even of the fact that it's difficult, of the grind and this and that. And if you just keep pushing, it'll be fine. And if you keep going. So maybe you could add a little bit more to give a realistic picture of, from your own experience and also just more general experience, what it's actually like starting a company. You obviously have a very long pre-revenue stage with uncertainty. You seek investment. You're not sure if you're going to get it. You have investment. You're not sure if you're going to be able to return on it. So maybe you could give us a more realistic picture of the step-by-step process of actually getting a company underway.
Sure. So imagine a funnel. And imagine a funnel where, of course, the funnel is getting smaller and smaller, more precise, but then that also reduces the probability of success in some way. So right at the top of the funnel is your grand idea. And we all love our ideas. We believe that we are the only ones who came up with that idea one fine morning, when the truth is millions of other people have had the exact same idea. And 1,000 of them are already working on it that you may not be aware of. So we believe that this idea can change the world. So we go on and think about that. And in our enthusiasm and in our optimism, we go to our friends or we go to some people that we know of and say, hey, let's just do this together. And you start jamming together, and you've not run the numbers. You haven't even sat down once to see what it means from an economic standpoint. Like, how much will it make for you? How much will you have to spend to make it? How much will be left at the end of it? Will it be enough? What all will be needed to make that happen? None of that. It's just blind faith. And you know what? Early on, that's how it should be. Because if you would really sit down, no big idea would ever reach a stage of being worked upon, because almost always in the beginning, it sounds like doomsday. And then you need capital. Capital in terms of money, capital in terms of manpower, capital in terms of infrastructure. And that requires you to be extremely enterprising, because not everyone will have access to money or to people or to infra. So you have to hustle your way through. You have to be very diligent as well as very smooth, very enterprising on how do you get access to that, whether it's startup pitching events, whether it's seeking out founders who want to work for free or employees who could be interns and so on. And then you have to orchestrate all of that to actually make something come out, whether it's a product or a service, and deliver it to the customer. And then you have to make the customer pay for it, not just once, but repeatedly, so that you can make money at the end of that exercise. And in this entire journey, which I've simplified to 1,000th level, you will have to manage people, which is the hardest thing to do in this world. You will have to manage the expectations that investors have from you, your friends and family have from you, your employees have from you, you have from you. And you will always feel the weight of those expectations. You will have to manage all economic cycles that are coming your way, which are completely outside of your control and for no fault of yours, whether it's a pandemic that hits it or a recession or whatnot. And then the fourth, in the middle of all of this, you have to bear the smile of a winner because everyone's looking at you. Or at least you think that everyone's looking at you. So your employees are looking up to you because all of their wealth and all of their time and all of their efforts are going in. Your investors are looking at you because you promised them that you'll make a lot of returns for them. Your family is looking up for you because you're going to change the way that the family status is there in society. The world's looking at you because either they want you to win or they want you to lose, but either way. So you are, quote unquote, a celebrity in the public eye, truly falling off an airplane while trying to fix your parachute, hoping that the parachute fixes itself in time. And then when you land in such a way that people are like, oh my God, take my money. This was such a great show. And the odds of all of that coming together, again, as I said, and I don't want to sound a hypocrite because I come from the startup fraternity and everything that I am is because of that fraternity, which is why I say it's not for everyone, because I've seen how it works. I've run funded companies and I know how that is stacked up against you. I'm running a bootstrap company. I know how that works and doesn't work. And I know what you run into and what kind of mental makeup one needs to get there. And the biggest mistake you can make is to read about the success of startups that made it and believe that that is the only truth. So one of my favorite questions for every founder when they're beginning to start is, how come this hasn't happened already? How come this hasn't happened already? Because it starts with the premise that I'm not the smartest person that I know or has lived. So my idea is there, dime a dozen, in the minds of thousands, if not millions of people. And a lot of them are already working on it. And if a lot of them are working on it, how come I don't see it? There has to be a reason. It could be an economic reason, it could be a regulatory reason, it could be a consumer demand reason, it could be a consumer demographic reason, psychographic reason. There has to be a reason why your idea that you are so fascinated by and believe it's the next big idea is not there in the world. And until you don't find the answer to that question, don't move forward. Your only step and effort is to find the answer to this question, because that answer will tell you what you have to fix. It's the same thing. When you look at the survivor stories, you have to ask yourself, who all failed while these survived? Because that story is just as important. If you are just drawn by the success of all the unicorns and you believe that that's the only truth and every startup goes on to become a unicorn and I believe that I'll become one, you're just drinking your own Kool-Aid and you have no idea what the reality is. But if you were to genuinely dig deep and find out, oh my God, for every Uber that I hear of, there are thousands of Ubers that never made it. That means maybe there's even something called luck. Do I want to play those odds? I still may, but I need to know that I'm literally gambling.
For every Uber, there's 1,000 hunters, I suppose. But in your TEDx talk that I watched yesterday, you emphasized that people are what make a company exist, survive, and prosper. And I'd like to discuss this with you, especially in relation to what you just said, because in my experience, it seems that the people in a company, the employees, rise and fall to the level of the system itself. I was wondering if you agree with that or if you disagree with that.
Sure. I do believe with what you said, the systems will define the quality of people and even their mindsets. But the fact is that those systems have not been granted to you. They were also designed by you. And that's where it goes back to that almost circle, if you may, a recursive loop, where people will be the ones who go on to define everything. That does include the founder in the first place and playing the most important role, whether a solo founder or multiple ones. I do believe, for example, the culture of the organization is almost always a reflection of the founder's personality. Very rarely, if at all ever, will you find a startup whose value system and cultural system is different from how the founder is as an individual. You will always find startups reflecting what their founder temperament is. And this then automatically will define what the systems will be, the value system will be, the processes will be. And in that way, you will get to a point where people will know which kinds will win and which kinds won't, and which kinds will get to success and which kinds will struggle, irrespective of the skills that they have. A good example is Amazon again. Amazon has a very, very distinct culture. It's a very 0 and 1 culture. You can't misjudge it. People going into Amazon know precisely what they're getting into. It's a frugal, very demanding, very input-based, very methodical, process-driven organization that's extremely forward-looking and patient. If you're not that kind of person, if you seek variety, if you're more like, let's just go and see what happens and we'll figure it out on our way, you're going to suck at Amazon. It'll be terrible. You may be the brightest person out there, but it'll be a disaster for you every single day because you'll hate to be there. Everyone will ask you, what's your 5-year plan? And you'll be like, fuck 5 years. Let's just do this. Let's just see where we go. Like, why do you want to go and think about 5 years when nobody knows what's going to happen tomorrow? No, you'll be an absolute disaster. And that's where people then build what works for that organization. So I 100% think that if you pick the right people up, which are a reflection of how the organizational system, value, processes are set up, it just aligns itself. And that goes back to a ridiculously good statement that Elon Musk had made, which is a company is the sum of all the vectors in the organization. What I mean by that is, and sorry, it's a little geeky, and that's why I trip over it as a physics student or an ex-physics student. A vector has a speed and a direction. It's not just speed. So it's not that you're going at 100 kilometers an hour. Sure. In what direction? Because if Ollie is going in 100 kilometers an hour north and Lucas is 100 kilometers an hour south, the two of you cancel each other. You don't add up.
I guess the difficult part, and I guess the culture which you set up is part of it, but only part of it. The difficult part is getting those vectors aligned and in the same direction. And that actually requires, I think, for a startup founder who needs to have so many other skills, a really good knowledge of people and how they work, and what makes them tick. So I guess my question to broaden it out a bit is, what have you learned about people from managing them? What makes them tick, and how can we direct people so that their vectors align?
The best thing that I learned about people was I used to believe people don't want to be managed. People don't want to be led. Smart people want to be on their own. They want to be just given this free hand, go and weave your magic, and they'll just come up with something fascinating, and you'll be just like, oh my God, my job was only to pick that person, and then they did what they had to do. And over time, I realized that that was possibly the worst interpretation of how humans work. I believe that 99% of all people in the world want to be led. They want a leader. They just don't want to be managed. And the distinction between being led and being managed is being told what to do, and being led is to be told where to reach. So when you lead, like I can imagine someone like an Elon Musk leading SpaceX, he's like, that's where we're going. It's called Mars. We're going to go there and set up a base. And that's what we have to achieve. And that's the leadership. So every day, the conversation is about what's getting us there, what's stopping us from get there, what do we need to get there, what do we not have to get there. And everything is about getting there. But then the management is, are you doing everything that you can to get there? I don't care what you're doing right now. I don't care what your next day is. I don't care what you achieve in the next quarter or the next year. Are you doing what is required to get there? And that is this big distinction. Now, because people do not know what true or good quality leadership is, they default to management. And management then becomes, hey, Ollie, have you done this? Hey, Lucas, are you on your track? Hey, Ollie, you said it'll be due. Are you going to turn it in? Hey, Lucas, you're supposed to do this. Are you done? And then gets irritating because like, bro, you got to either trust me or just keep asking until I want to quit. So the biggest lesson that I've learned about people is 99% of the people want to be led. They want direction. They don't want to be headless. They don't want to be directionless. They don't want to be like, we are in charge of our own destiny, because most people are not comfortable with that. Most people in maybe Lucas's terms are not entrepreneurs. They love being what I would call an employee, where they're told, here is the direction we're heading towards. And now you go and do your thing. And when I realized that changed a lot in a good way, because it gave me clarity over what my role is suddenly as a startup founder. It's not to, and I say this, it's to be replaceable with my skills, but to be irreplaceable with my vision. And if I can get to that point as a startup founder, where my skill, whatever my skills are, can be easily replaced by somebody else, but the vision I have is almost unique to me, I think I've done my bit as a people manager.
Yeah. Could you maybe expand on that a little bit? Because you mentioned that if you're a manager, you shouldn't maybe go to someone and say, "Oh, are you on track?" or follow up in a certain way. But I also feel that maybe for some companies, employees might be less willing to do the work if they're not being quote unquote policed in that way. So how does a manager find the balance between being bossy and micromanaging, but also make sure that things are getting done?
The best way, in my opinion, is to align the incentives to how you want the action to be. For example, I'll give you what we do at our startup right now. In our startup, I care about two things. I care about timeliness of work, and I care about quality of work. These are the only two things I care about. I don't care about people showing up every day in the sense of you have to work a certain hour every day, or you need to be in office by X, you can leave by only Y, and that you have to show up at 5 days a week. None of that. I couldn't care less. Like, you could do all of your work in just one day of the week, and if you're smart enough, take the rest of the week off. You want to do it every single day for a little bit of time and spread yourself? Sure, be my guest. You want to do it all at the end and procrastinate in the beginning? Sure. Whatever works for you. Don't care. So if my incentives are aligned around timeliness and quality, these are the only two things that I'm measuring and the only two things that I am rewarding people for. So in our organization, we have whatever is the bonus after the fixed component of their salary. The bonus is a component of their timeliness and of their quality. And timeliness is simply defined as whether they did their work by the time that they were supposed to turn it in. Just that. Not whether they worked every day towards that. Not that they worked right at the beginning or towards the end or a combination thereof. Don't care about the details. So if Ollie, you're supposed to turn in your work in 2 weeks from now, did you turn it in 2 weeks from now? That's it. Don't care what you did during those 2 weeks. Of course, if you need help, we're always there. But you're your own manager of time and how you want to do it. And when you did turn that in, was that of the quality that we desired or not? And these are the only two questions that are asked for every single task done by every single person. Was it done on time? Was it the quality that we demanded it? And as long as you're hitting that, you will be in the top spectrum. If you're not hitting it, you'll be in the bottom, and a combination thereof. So instantly, people are incentivized for the right things. And goes back to Charlie Munger's favorite and often quoted quote, which says, fix the incentives, fix the outcome. Because very often, the problem with the outcome that you're unable to get to is a problem with the incentives that you've designed to make it happen in the first place.
Well, thank you, Ankur. That's been some amazing advice, both for entrepreneur and startup founders and people in general. To know people, we've talked about motivation, discipline, and much more. And I just want to finish on one last question. As somebody who spent a lot of his time managing, being around, but also helping and teaching people, what qualities should we select for in our friends?
That's such a good question. I think the only thing that you look for in a friend is somebody who can tell you the truth, even when it's the hardest thing to do so. It's the rarest thing to find. It's the rarest thing to find. And when you find that, which you'll often find, at least I have in my experience, is that the only true definition of a friend becomes not somebody who is willing to share your sorrows or your pains together, but somebody who's just as happy as you are with your success. Because it is the rarest thing to find somebody who's just as happy as you are when you win. If you find that person, that's a true friend. And almost always that person will be the one who will tell you the truth or call out your bullshit, even when it's the hardest thing to do.
Thank you. I think that's a great note to sign off on. Thank you so much, Ankur Warikoo. This has been the Loaf Podcast, signing off. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, and you want to have another one just like it, click right here. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps the channel, and we're always coming out with new videos like this. See you guys next time.